Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar designed to help you make workplace wellness your superpower at your company. Now, this webinar is brought to you by iOpening Enterprises, a professional development and media company that helps leaders use psychological science to transform their workplace. My name is Andrea Haro, and I am a program director at IOE. Now, before we get started, a few quick items on how to participate in today's event. Today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes with a Q&A at the end, so please submit all your questions through the chat. All participants will be muted to ensure everyone can hear our wonderful panel. This webinar will be recorded and sent to you in the next week. And we will have a couple of poll questions, so please participate in this interactive experience we put together just for you. And now that we have that out of the way, I'll turn the webinar over to our founder and CEO, Dr. Isaiah Pickens, a clinical psychologist who has consulted for a number of large organizations and systems on how to promote workplace wellness, integrate trauma-informed practices, and use diversity, equity, and inclusion to better workplaces. It's all yours, Dr. Isaiah.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and I am so excited to be here with you all today. I have been waiting for this moment for a while because as our country reels from coronavirus, the pandemic, and all of the challenges that we face, part of what we have really tried to focus on here at iOpening is how we can be of service to the community. But I also speak to you as an entrepreneur, as someone who has had to build a company and really think about other people who we are working with in this time of uncertainty. And I know the sacrifices that you make either as human resource professionals, that you make as individuals who are executives and in charge of the livelihood of other people, and the long nights that you've put in to build your vision, to build your dream, or to build a vision or dream of an organization that you believe in. And so today we really want to be able to give you some tangible tools to walk away with, feeling that you can actually go into your office the next day, even the next hour, better understanding how to manage all of the uncertainty we have now, but also how to build a workplace that feels both safe and that people trust you. Because we know in this time, one of the things that can really fall short is trust, because we don't know what's going to happen next. And so with that, I'm excited to introduce our panel, as well as a little treat that we have for you all. Part of what we wanted to do is really be able to represent what we're talking about, not just in terms of what we're saying, but also visually. And so we have the very talented Rio Holiday, who will be graphically recording our time together. And so as you participate today and as you experience this webinar, you'll also be able to see what it looks like visually in order to share some of this information. And one of the reasons why I think this is so excellent in terms of an opportunity for folks is that we communicate in many different ways, and sometimes words just aren't enough. And this is one of the moments in history where words might not be enough. And we want to give you other ways to be able to connect with your staff, to be able to connect with people in your life, and hopefully take some of these tools, not just to help others, but to build yourself. With that being said, let me introduce our wonderful panel that we have here today. Look at all these beautiful faces. Don't you guys just want to get to know them personally? We're so excited to have them on. And while I introduce them, I'll actually have our first poll question launched because we want this to be a very engaging and interactive experience for you. And so our first poll question, it'll pop on the screen for you any moment now. And you can see what it's asking is, what is your biggest concern about your staff? What is your biggest concern about your staff? Is it your ability to keep up with the work given the current circumstances, the distrust of leadership or fear of negative changes in the company, the well-being and ability to have work-life balance, or that they don't get it through their head? I'm the boss and I make the decisions. Whatever it is, it's cool. You guys just go ahead and mark that. And what I'm going to do really quickly is introduce this wonderful, wonderful panel. So first, we have two executives here who are going to really give insights on how they've not only been managing what's happening now, but where they've come from in terms of building organizations and building individuals. Our first executive panelist that we have for today is Narayan Chowdhury, and he is responsible for the analysis and evaluation valuation at a private equity investment firm, Franklin Park. And one of the things I love about Narayan and what he brings to the table is not only does he work at a firm that has more of a flat structure, but the ability to really share their knowledge and wisdom with one another. But during this time, they really use that knowledge and wisdom to help healthcare industries, and particularly technology-based healthcare industries, weather this storm. And so he's going to give us some insights on how he built his business and how he's really trying to help create safety in this time. Psychological and emotional safety in this time is what we'll talk a bit more about. And then our other executive, Kennedy Garcia, is just a phenomenal woman who's been a lifelong advocate for women and girls. She's currently a healthcare executive that has that's nationally accountable for legislative policy, execution, and organizational development and strategic planning. She has worked in a number of organizations, advanced projects related to STEM, particularly for girls, and owns the company Spiritual Boss Chick and the Dream Academy that really works to promote female empowerment and help them accomplish their goals. She does plenty of talking around the country in good ways. There's plenty of people who talk and don't have anything to say. She has a lot to say that's really important. And she's also the host of a popular podcast, If This Crown Could Talk. And so we're really excited to have both of them, award-winning executives, on this call with us, on this webinar with us. But the other treat that we have is not just the executives who are going to share their wisdom, but two of my favorite people, our eye-opening associates, Dr. Shanique Massey-Lambert and Dr. Fong Johnson. Both of these psychologists have done tremendous work within many systems to really be able to ensure that whether it's justice, schools, workplace wellness, these systems effectively are able to not only implement the practices, whether it's trauma-informed, mental health-based practices, but also understand it in a digestible way and can deliver it in a way that's helpful and practical for their staff. Dr. Shanique Massey-Lambert, she's at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and we got the West Coast represented with Dr. Fong Johnson here on the West Coast in Washington State. And so I'm really excited to get started with this conversation. Eye-Opening Enterprises really believes in being able to give people digestible and relatable content to be able to support you every day. And so with that being said, we're going to end our poll and see where people landed. I think it's actually a live poll, so we can kind of see. So people felt that well-being and ability to have work-life balance is huge. And that's something that's really big. I do want to know who that one person is who wants them to know that I'm the boss and I make the decisions. We'll talk to you later. We got a different session for you. All right, guys, we're really excited to get started. I'm going to ask Narayan to come on and just to share a little bit about how he started his company with his partners, how they dealt with stress in the early years, and how they've really been able to maintain their ability to manage stress in this current environment. Welcome on, Narayan.
Thank you, Isaiah. Good afternoon from Philadelphia. Good morning to the West Coast folks. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I'm not a healthcare professional, so I think I'm happy to talk about my experience, but I'm really looking forward to learning. I suspect I'm going to be gaining a lot more than I give on this call. But a bit about our company, my background. I'm one of the co-founders, one of 6 that started Franklin Park in 2003. So this is now a 17-year going concern, and you know, I think context is important when we talk about how we're approaching mental, physical health here. And I think we have a bit of an odd outlier structure. There's only 25 of us. We're predominantly all just in one office. We've lost one person in 10 years. So it's a tight-knit, flat organization. And there's a lot of everyone knows everyone's story, family, so it's probably a bit unusual as workplaces go. And so I would say the stresses now are very much in line with the poll in terms of figuring out work-life balances. A lot of my colleagues have families, so maintaining productivity with children in house. All that is very much probably primary concern, and we're very fortunate that way. It wasn't always the case. When I think back to the formation, we left our predecessor, 6 of us, to start Franklin Park. We didn't have a single client. It was 18 months before anyone was paid. That was a really stressful time. And I think about it. I think one of the things that let us persevere, this might sound odd, but was our ignorance. I was 25 at the time. I was happy to live on the crackers and sausage and cheeses that we would get at holidays from our prospective clients. I was happy to just eat carbs all day and not go out and just work. There was a bit of ignorance and just the stage we were at in our life that made it manageable. There's no way we could do that now with our families. So we were in an interesting point in our lives to start this company. Still, I remember taking a loan out on my car. I got a small loan from our senior partners who had built up a bit more savings. I think one of the reasons we started the firm was because we had a mutual trust for each other at our predecessor. And so that carried over, and I think was very, very critical for weathering that initial storm. So I think I'm taking up a lot of time. I'm happy to dig into some of the more current stuff, but I wanted to pause and see if that made sense, Isaiah.
That makes great sense. And if you want to just share a little bit, Narayan, about how you guys have maintained your ability to feel connected, to feel safe in this present moment with all the uncertainty.
So again, it's fortunate that we all know each other. There aren't a lot of new faces. And that said, if you were to come to our office pre-pandemic, it was as quiet as a library. It's a very, very odd office. People come in, do their work, and go back to their families. And I don't know if we appreciated how much we missed each other. So there was an immediate request from a bunch of people to have some happy hours. And so a couple of things that I think we did well and adapted well over time. 2 people stepped up, our CFO, I'm sorry, our chief counsel and our chief compliance officer took it upon themselves to be the nexus for information for our firm. They've disseminated the charitable activities, the way we're giving back to the community. They've been a sort of a hub and spoke back to all the distributed workforce, which is probably in a 60-mile radius around our headquarters. So there's a lot of little micro communities. But it was great that Carl and Lori really took the lead there. I think that the second thing that we've all talked about as we're having our daily interactions is we stop watching the news. Not that we're not gathering information, but I think early on in the pandemic, everyone was frantic for information and searching wherever they could for whatever they could. And I think we've all agreed internally that that's probably been unhealthy. And to rely on sources of information that are virologists, epidemiologists, disease specialists, technical specialists that are really looking at the data and limit that sort of interactivity maybe once a day or so. I'm glossing over a bit. I mean, this has been a work in process, but not obsessing over those daily tidbits has been super helpful. And the other thing is talking about work-life balance and how are we managing with kids and how are we different little life hacks. There's an area in Philadelphia called the Navy Yard, which is a very expansive, largely abandoned area now that it's good to be outside, walk around. And so sharing these little life hacks has been great. And then the last thing is, it just sort of acknowledging our privilege. We're an industry where our clients are still using us. We have a stable revenue base, which means we have stable incomes, which means we have a stable workforce. Our families are safe. So if everything is sort of checked out internally, let's start focusing on our community. And again, we're in a privileged place where we're talking to technologists, healthcare investors, which has allowed us to, in some case, just make connections. We're not negotiating or doing anything special, but making connections with PPE providers, some in China, which we have some investments through, or people who are working on open source PPE projects at Brigham and Women's, connecting them with startups, fabricators in Philly, connecting all those parties with some of our hospital healthcare system contacts here in Philly. So doing what we can to help the frontline workers has certainly been a luxury. We have the luxury to feel like Franklin Park is generally, taken care of, so we can focus on those entities, and that's what we've been trying to do lately.
That's excellent, Orion. I thank you for setting us up with this. And with that leading off, we're going to bring in our panelists. And for those who might have questions for Narayan, he'll be back during our Q&A time. But a big part of what Narayan shared that was so important, and I'm going to ask Dr. Fong Johnson and Dr. Shanique Massey-Lambert to hop on the call or to hop on the video, is being able to have enough emotional intelligence to know what your staff need at a given moment and being able to share that. So much of emotional intelligence is around self-awareness and our ability to really navigate both the challenges that are seen, but also the needs and desires that are unseen. And so I want to start with Dr. Shanique Massey-Lambert. If you could just share a little bit about how emotional intelligence plays a role in this space, and just jumping off from what Narayan just shared.
Sure. So kudos to Narayan and his team, because it sounds like they have a great deal of team cohesion. And it sounds like they've done a great job of engaging the entire person. They know a little bit about each other. They support each other inside and outside of the workplace. So that's a great example of what it looks like to model emotional intelligence, but also create an environment where that skill can be developed. I think when we talk about agencies having emotional intelligence, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for leadership to model what it looks like to be self-aware, to be able to manage your emotions, to be able to empathize with the emotion other. We're looking at social skills, and we're looking at overall motivation. Environments that really foster the development of those skills are going to be those where working in teams is not an issue. Problem solving under pressure is not an issue. There's a culture of support and just really cool cooperation. When those things are lacking, you're going to see a lot of conflict. You're going to see people really being passive aggressive, struggling to get together in teams, blaming, kind of pointing fingers. It wasn't my fault, it was that person's fault, and a lack of just accountability. I can share a quick example that I do some consulting work with different agencies, and one in particular a few years ago was a situation where staff was expected to provide education and therapeutic services to consumers, to young children. And within this agency, the administration kind of said, we need you to consult and kind of fix them. But as you know, there's issues on both sides. So what I quickly learned is that the staff was in an environment where none of those things were being provided. And when there's a lack of emotional intelligence, the environment feels unsafe. Okay. And what we're talking about is not just physical safety. We're talking about psychological safety. The belief that I can take care of myself. I know when something's not right. I can do what I need to do to get comfortable again. And if I can't, I can trust someone in my immediate environment to have my back and to kind of, give me the supports that I need. So this staff complained that they didn't feel that they were well trained. They didn't feel like they had the skills they needed to handle students with emotional issues. Students started becoming physically aggressive towards them. And what the admin was telling them is, you signed up for this. I'm sorry about that, but this is a part of the job, and we're giving you what you need, and you just kind of have to knuckle up and deal with it. So over time, what I started to see is that the staff really started to become impacted. They were impacted by some vicarious trauma because they're hearing some really heavy stuff from the consumers in their environment. And they were also impacted by being physically assaulted. And they had little help around that, even though they made a lot of suggestions. So over time, you know, because those employers weren't able to provide that safety, they found a way to protect themselves. And those staff members started to engage in physical altercations with young people, which is scary. But when we think about what safety is about, it's about our basic needs. If those basic needs feel that they are being threatened or at risk, we go into survival mode and we do what we need to do. I think the overall goal in really supporting the development of these skills is that you send the message that we're invested in you as a whole person, that what you need is available to you. You're welcome to ask for that. And there's no need for you as the employee to figure out a way around the system to get what you need. Because when we do that, we end up in trouble, and you know, productivity and the quality of work really is impacted.
Dr. Shanique, I love what you're saying here, because I think for so many leaders, they believe that being a strong leader means not showing emotion. It means saying, I'm giving you what you need functionally. All the other stuff you need to leave outside of work, because that's not about work. But what you're saying is when leaders actually lean in to their own emotional intelligence, their own ability to be able to share, like, we're all feeling uncertain now. What are the things that you need to feel taken care of, to be honest, to feel taken care of as an individual in this moment, and then being responsive to that, I think is so powerful for this idea of how to create safety in the workplace. I want to shift to Dr. Johnson, because Dr. Fong, and really just talk a little bit about this ability of leaders to really shape the emotional experience of the work environment. There's a concept called emotional contagion that speaks to this idea of the emotional state of the leader shapes how other people in the organization feel. And it's really like a contagion. It can be very contagious. And so I would love to hear from you about how do leaders use that in a way that promotes psychological safety, a safe workplace, instead of having the staff fight the kids. So Dr. Johnson, would you share something with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I thought a lot about this question and the different roles that I do. And so I was thinking about one of the roles I do is I work in private practice, and a lot of the kids and families that I work with, their parents work for some major companies. So I live in Seattle, and so you can guess what those major companies are. I won't name them, but some of them provide 2-hour delivery service. So you can make a guess. But my point being is that I think that the emotional intelligence that leaders display in the workplace is so important, not just to cultivate a positive workplace so that your productivity increases in the workplace, but I also think that we don't consider our employees and how they take it home. And it's a cycle, right? So if they're not happy in the workplace, they take it home, and then it impacts their kids, and then it impacts their families, and then it comes back to the workplace, and they can become resentful towards the workplace. So I've seen leaders who can be very compassionate, very kind and understanding, and there for their employees, and have a listening ear, and have an interest in their employees' lives to a degree that's appropriate. Obviously, it's important to establish boundaries. But at the same time, if you have leaders that are cold and it's all about the work, all about the productivity, and there's really no care about that person and who they are and who they exist outside of that workplace, then you're only going to get one piece of that individual. And not only has research shown, but I've seen it myself, the productivity decline. I will say that about 80% of the parents that I've worked with that work for these major companies have left. Because they are so stressed and they are so fed up with their supervisors, and they end up going for smaller tech companies. They go to smaller companies because they feel like it's more family-based. They feel way more connected, and they feel like their leaders, they respect their leaders, they respect their supervisors, but they also feel like they have an actual relationship with them. So I think that's really critical to consider.
These are some excellent points that you guys shared around how to create safety. And so you guys will be back with us on the second half. So they're going to go off video real quick. And what I want to share with you all briefly, and we'll have briefly Rio go off video as we share how we can really take home some tips around safety that are very practical for you. So you guys see on the screen a couple of really concrete tips that you can use as a leader to start creating safety. Now, here's one of the things I think is most important for us to understand. People do not feel safe if they do not feel valued. Because if they don't feel valued as your employee, as your coworker, as whoever they may be, they feel like you won't take the necessary time to find out what they need or even to help them if they bring those needs to you. So some things that you can do is really very simple. Create a culture of gratitude. So things you might want to do is starting your meetings, your team meetings, whatever they are, with one gratitude for a colleague. So this not only allows you to bring gratitude into your workplace, but it also shapes how you are shaping colleagues to connect with other colleagues. So not only can you model it as a leader, but you can prompt your employees to do this with one another so that that becomes a way that they engage on a regular basis. The other thing you can do is really think about your ability to keep colleagues together through supervision, as well as potentially through buddy systems. And so being able to integrate some of these wellness practices, whether it's a mindfulness-based practice or another type of practice, can really go a long way. I'll tell you, one of the companies that I used to work for, one of the things they did that I think was excellent to really help build this culture around safety is they said they wanted to create a fun committee. But no one wants to do extra work for the sake of extra work. So what they actually did is they chose a couple of people who said that they really want to make this happen, and they put this a part of their actual job duties. So they could use company time to focus on creating fun events for individuals within the organization that helped everyone feel connected. So instead of it being punishment for wanting something better, it became a part of their job duties. And so that created a cascade, a domino effect where people looked to them to create these events. It was also not a taxing part of their job because they had this actual job responsibility that you could connect about and that you could provide for. And then the second concrete step I'll share with folks is really being able to create opportunities for meaningful contribution. As a CEO and entrepreneur, one of the things I've learned early on is that people can feel that their contribution doesn't matter. And when that happens, they disconnect, whether it's actual physically disconnecting, as Dr. Fong shared with people leaving the company, or if it's an emotional and mental disconnection. I've seen so many times where people say, you know what, they don't care about me. I'm not taking on any extra assignments. I'm not doing anything else. But if you just make a small effort as a leader to let people know that their contribution is meaningful, even in a very minor way, it can go a long way. So maybe you create a system where staff can give a recommendation, and the recommendation might be outlandish, right? Give us a week off. Well, you can't do that, but you can at least acknowledge the fact, I heard this recommendation, and what I'm hearing is that you just don't want a week off, is that you need a break. And so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have once a week where people can rotate in or out, no questions asked, for you to have a break, and everyone gets one of these once a week, right? So this is something that you're taking this recommendation, acknowledging the fact that someone gave it. You can't respond to it in that moment because it is outside of the parameters of what you can do, but you can respond in a way that shows that you're hearing. The other thing you can do is diversify job responsibilities, and that kind of goes to the previous point I made. For one of the jobs I've worked at, they diversified the job responsibility to include a fund committee, to include actually connecting with some of your coworkers, being a part of the job responsibilities. One thing I'll say, and I think this is a great lead-in for our next executive, is that so much of what we do is based on relationship, but it's also based on the policies that you implement to reinforce that relationship and start to build that culture. And so with that being said, I want to bring in Kennedy Garcia to really share about her experience as a health executive and how she's been able to build trust with her staff.
Hello, everybody. So hopefully you can see and hear me now. I am Kennedy Garcia and have been an executive for quite some time. As mentioned before, I work for a very large HMO based out of the Bay Area with a footprint across the United States. And then I also have my own company and a nonprofit that I founded myself. You know, creating and establishing trust is always an important aspect of leadership. And what I've learned in leadership and being an executive is that, you know, you shift from managing work to managing behavior. And you need to be able to create trust in order to truly manage people's behaviors, their expectations. Some of the things that I've used to be able to do that has been, first and foremost, creating positive relationships. So, kind of I heard somebody talk about the absence of emotion from a leader with their staff. And I actually believe that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show emotion. And there's this emotional intelligence that everybody must have in order to really connect with the people that report to you. I see my role as a leader to inspire them to do the things that need to get done versus being one that tells them to do the things that needs to get done. And the only way to inspire them is sort of to have that personal connection, that personal relationship. Another way I've established trust with the people who report to me, and colleagues as well, because that's important too, is just being an expert and using good judgment. So if they can't depend on me for the answers in which are in my span of control, my accountability, if they can't get those answers from me, then the credibility is challenged, need I say. So just making sure that I'm always at the top of my game and that I'm demonstrating my expertise, and then also using good judgment in the decisions that I make that impact them. And ultimately, that's really what they're thinking about, right? And so everybody operates with the with them in mind. It's what's in it for me. And so when you start to make decisions as a leader, it's really important that you're thinking from the perspective of the people who are impacted the most. And then lastly, I think being consistent is underrated. It is so important in establishing trust, is that you are consistent. You are consistent with your own behavior. It is aligned to the things that you are asking them to do. You are consistently making decisions with integrity and operating in that way. And you show up in a way that is consistent with them so that they know what to expect. I think that enables people to see that they can rely on you. And then you've already started to sort of develop that relationship, which will help you learn who they are as a person. Because the last point I'm going to make is really about making sure that you create a space for people to bring their whole selves to work, to whatever project you're on, whatever it is that you're doing with them. Bringing their entire selves is going to be extremely important, because you will have those people who think differently based on their background, their cultural differences, things that you should consider as you are leading these people into the future.
That is excellent, Kennedy. I thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to ask our experts to come back on, and we'll have Kennedy back during our question and answer in about 10 minutes, in a couple of minutes. But Dr. Shanique, Dr. Fong, one of the things I took from what Kennedy said that is so important and is tied to the safety piece is that building trust is a bridge towards creating safety, because it lets people know it's okay to be all of you. I can't tell you how many times I've been in work situations where people have felt that it is not okay to show certain parts of myself, because that can mean I don't have my job. You might talk about a woman who says, I don't want them to know I'm pregnant yet, right? Because I feel like they're going to, not give me the assignments that will allow me to progress. You might have, a person of color who says, I don't want to speak up just now because I don't want them to think I'm that angry person who, is going to cause a bunch of problems, and then that puts my job at jeopardy. And so I want to really dig into this idea of how we build trust and how we start to do that in a way that promotes safety. And so I'm going to start with you, Dr. Fong. If you could just share a bit about how we go about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the topic is so important and so complex. And, clearly I want to start off with that. I really encourage everyone to do their own work around understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion outside of this webinar. But a little bit about myself. I am Asian, in case you couldn't tell, but I also have a disability, and that's something a lot of people can't see. So I have long hair, I cover my ears, and my disability is that I have a severe hearing impairment. So I wear hearing aids in both ears. And that's something that I've been pretty strategic about whether or not I bring it up to my employers or not. And that's been very tricky to navigate in multiple workplaces, because there's certain things that I need, right? So if I have to have a landline telephone, I would like to have a caption service. If I'm being asked to code certain audios, I would need it to be transcribed. All of that takes extra time in the workplace, all of which I have the right to under the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, as we all know, certain companies have found loopholes to not provide certain services. And so whether or not I feel safe in an environment impacts whether or not I bring that up. And that also impacts my productivity, right? So if I don't have everything in place, then I can't really do my job fully, right? And so I think that's so important to ensure that you are getting to know the whole person of your staff, and you're not going to know the needs of your staff unless you get to know them a little bit more and include them into your work.
That's excellent, and I thank you for being so vulnerable, first of all, and sharing that part of yourself, you know, with strangers, let alone, you know, having to do that with your bosses. And you know, I think so much of what you said too, especially as it relates to the productivity, is I don't think people fully appreciate how much mental energy goes into our having to keep ourselves safe, having to protect ourselves, right? To not show certain parts of ourselves in the workplace. And all that energy, all that mental energy that's going towards that is shifted away from our actual work, which makes it more difficult for us to actually be able to connect. But what trust can do is it can free up all that mental space that's being used for to protect myself in the workplace, to really be connecting and build the workplace into a place where we're actually reaching the goals overall for the company, but also getting back to what Dr. Shanique said earlier, I also feel like my needs are being met as best as they can so that I feel safe in this space. And so, Dr. Shanique, I want to bring you in and just have you share a little bit more about how does this play a role in building trust?
Yes, I think that all the points made so far have been amazing. The idea that we want there to be trust in an environment so that people feel comfortable with sharing all of who they are and they feel welcomed, and not just welcomed, but different aspects of themselves are celebrated, right? So that you know, there's trust there, and we do that with relationships. But I think what is equally as important as getting people to share who they are is making sure that we don't weaponize the information that's been shared. And I have worked with a ton of people who have said, you know, I thought we were good and then we weren't, you know, or we were good until we weren't. I have a few colleagues who work in the mental health field in different institutions, and all of us have been asked to work, you know, remotely, and they have two very different experiences of working remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. One colleague talked about the idea that, you know, when this all happened, they felt fear and panic, all of the things that we expect to happen in a traumatic crisis. But they were met by a supervisor who said, you know, well, I know that you have children. Are your children home with you? Or is the child's school open? How do you plan to get work done while your child is home? So they were bombarded with all these questions about productivity and not about their experience of making this quick, unexpected, you know, transition with that, you know, with such a lack of control. That colleague of mine felt very overwhelmed, felt extremely resentful, and felt attacked. You know, they felt that they had to choose between parenting and being, you know, an employee. Two aspects of their identity that are really important. This person has strong work ethic and really cares for the work that they do, but they love their family too. So, you know, I think it's a matter of approach and communication. The other colleague talked about the fact that when this happened, they felt that same, you know, fear and panic, but their supervisor came to them and said, let's talk about what's happening. This is really stressful. This is very different. We're kind of in new territory. You know, how are you adjusting? And this is what I'm doing. And what stood out for that colleague was that the supervisor shared their own experience in an appropriate way. And it seemed that for that colleague, it humanized their supervisor and really made them feel that this was, you know, this was a we thing, not a you figure it out, get it done on your own kind of thing. It's how do we get through this together? And that person left that situation really feeling valued, really feeling seen, and feeling motivated to, you know, kind of stay with their company, where the other one is probably contemplating next steps and, you know, a route out. So I really think that the style in which we engage employees is important. And when we're attempting to gather this information, we just have to really be conscious about how we use it, so that we don't make them regret bringing who they are or all of who they are to the workplace.
That's just such an excellent point, Dr. Shanique, around how we use the information. So it's not just being able to acknowledge and create a space where they can share it, but what do we do with it? And what we do with it, either whether it's through apathy and not listening or through using it against them, really can erode trust and make it difficult for them to give us that information in the future. But we can, in another way, really focus on how do we celebrate and use this to create a richer workplace experience, not just for them, but for everyone else. So Dr. Fong and Dr. Shanique will be back in one moment. I'm going to share a couple of concrete steps around building trust that you can think about. And we're going to also launch one more poll question around how you build trust while we do this, but just some concrete steps for you to think about how you go about building trust. The first one, Dr. Shanique really spoke about: create opportunities to share reasons for stress without reprisal. One of the things I have really seen in a lot of organizations is the leadership thinking the workplace is one way, and the people on the ground saying it is nothing like that. They haven't even been out of their ivory tower for years. How would they even know what's happening down here? And so part of what we always encourage is to create spaces where staff of similar status can connect and share what's stressing them, and then give recommendations in a way that doesn't create a reprisal, and also that allows people to think about this. So you'll see this poll question has just popped up on your screen. How will you work to continue building trust after the pandemic? Will you invite feedback from staff for creating a more inclusive workplace? Will you collaborate for developing plans for the rest of the year? Find ways to increase transparency to staff? Or the question is actually, do I trust me? so maybe you have to build trust with yourself first before you start building trust with other people. And so we'll end that poll in 1 second. But for the moment, I really want to encourage people to find spaces that your staff can connect with one another in ways that they don't feel that the power differential plays a role in how they're showing them the situation. Now, a topic that we haven't talked a lot about and that deserves a lot of focus is that there is power in different identities. And what I mean by power is the ability of a person to not have to change themselves in order to be accepted by the environment. That's power, right? So in a lot of our corporate settings, we've seen male privilege, right? The idea if I'm working hard, if I'm hustling, people will just see me as a hustler, as a go-getter. But if I'm a woman doing the same thing, people might say she's mean. They might have even worse words to say about her because she's hustling in that same way. Now, when we become aware of that power, of that privilege, and we can actually, in a way, even have conversations around it, we're able to create spaces that better allow people to bring their whole self in without feeling that they need to protect themselves while they're doing it. And it allows them to fully invite all of their skill set into the workplace that I tell you time and time again, research has shown this. The reason why more diverse workplaces are more productive or more effective in their work when they create inclusive environments is because people aren't afraid to share ideas. People aren't afraid to bring in aspects of their lived experience that can really help your company grow and build in this moment, but they have to feel that it's safe enough to bring this back. So here's some other ways to be able to do this. Routinely celebrate these skills, understand their uniqueness. This might be inviting staff to share a moment that has shaped them. I've seen plenty of leaders do this to great effect around the idea of let's have a moment for all of us to share something that shaped us. And what has come from that has been so many rich understandings of one another, not just about your life experience, but how people best communicate, why people might be upset with other people because they're reading the situation in a way based on their life experience versus what the person is intending to do. And so all of this can be really helpful. The other thing is people need permission to be able to give feedback, particularly your employees. And so if you're able to model periodic feedback that's not related to any problem, not related to blaming people, but really is embedded in your system, it goes a long way in building trust. And when you can be responsive to that over time and really allow the staff to feel that they have a meaningful contribution, it goes a long way to inspiring greater trust. And so I really want to encourage you to think about ways to do that in your workplace and in how you're dealing with a lot of the challenges that you're facing. So our poll is ended. And as you can see, many people feel like they're building trust through collaborating with the rest of their staff and people around and finding ways to increase transparency. There's a couple of people who don't trust themselves. we got a whole nother webinar for you. But I appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts in this webinar. I'm going to ask all of our panelists to come back on, Narayan, Kennedy, Dr. Shanique, Dr. Fong, and for us to really just have a final conversation. I know we're about at time. We're going to take about 5 more minutes to have a short Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the question box. But what we're going to do before people are able to share some of their questions is just bring our whole panel in to share a little bit about their thoughts around how we can build on this content and really start to think about ways that we promote personal safety. And so one of the questions that I want us to really consider right now and for our panelists to share their ideas on is, how do you think we can really, during the time of this pandemic, use this opportunity as a way to rebuild our workplaces to create safety and trust? Because clearly this is something that's completely shifted workplaces, but part of what we can see this as an opportunity to rebuild something better. What are some recommendations that you all would have as panelists?
All right, I'll go first if everybody's okay with that. You know, I've been thinking about this because as we start to plan re-entry, is what we're calling it, right? People have been working remotely in roles that they typically come into the office every day. We've kind of shifted people's lives around. What I'm doing for my staff is I'm going to continue to extend the ability for them to work remotely and stay home. I have a few people who are parents, their kids don't have a school to go back to. Let's just face it, right? And so life is different, and we're not going to go back to where we were. We are going to move to a new normal. And so how do I help them transition to that new normal in a way that shows them the empathy that they need? Because right now they're trying to figure out life just like we're trying to figure out from a leadership perspective, what do we do to make sure that we meet our objectives and our goals, right? So that is first and foremost the thing that's on my mind, is creating trust with them through making sure that they understand that I know what they need because I've listened to what they need. And it's not me telling them what they need, it's me hearing what they need and responding to it.
That's great, Kennedy. And I think it speaks so much to understanding not just the kind of surface level needs, but being willing to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what those larger needs are. And I think Dr. Fong's going to hop in. One thing I want to just really highlight really quickly is that this moment is potentially triggering in ways that we don't even realize. I actually had a colleague who said that the stay-at-home order, even though they're a younger colleague, a younger Jewish colleague, gave them feelings of the Holocaust, because that's how it started, right? And so the idea of this being a traumatic event that's potentially triggering people is something that's so important to be mindful of. And how do we start to carefully kind of invite people to trust us enough to share information? Dr. Fong?
Oh, I was just noticing Chanel's question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be good to answer. She said, due to the pandemic, I'm seeing less patience and stress materializing into less professional action by employees. Any recommendations on how to address this? I think it's such an important question, and it ties really nicely to what you're saying. Both of you guys are saying about this. This is really a collective trauma for a lot of us that we're all going through, and a lot of people are responding very differently. I had a funny story. My husband, he's a pharmacist and worked in a clinic. And when I found out he had to go back to the clinic, I responded in a way that I didn't think I was going to. I was extremely anxious. And I was like, we need a protocol. You need to disinfect before you come into the house. You need to strip naked in the car and then run into the house. And he's like, but then there's going to be like this naked Black guy in the neighborhood. And that's not going to be appropriate for me to just be naked outside of the house. And I'm like, okay, that's right. But, you know, I was very extreme in my response. I was really stressed out. I'm like, we have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Your mom coming to help us. And so I think the answer to that question is making sure we're providing resources. I think there's a lot of mental health resources that people aren't aware of. Many of us are providing telehealth services now. And I think it's important to provide those resources to people. I also think that sometimes people aren't ready for mental health services. So ensuring that they have other people they can talk to and vent to, modeling good behavior. I think modeling that this is also stressful for you as a leader, and these are the things you're doing to cope. Saying things, I think even just reassuring people, like if you have a day where you're not productive, that's okay. Just let it go. I think we all need to kind of like lower our expectations in a lot of ways. So that's kind of my response, ensuring that we're providing resources, checking in with people individually. And I think it's okay to kind of like nicely call it out and say, you know, hey, I noticed that you're responding this way and I haven't seen you respond that way. Is there anything I can do for you? Is there any, can I send you some groceries? You know, is there anything that I can do? So that's kind of my thought on that.
That's so great. And I think, you know, a big part of what you're saying around this is, as leaders, sometimes we feel like we need to have all the answers. We do not need to have all the answers. We need to be the person who can ask the right questions. Kennedy says she does, but every other leader in the world does not need all the answers. But it's about being able to create a space that feels safe enough to ask the right questions and get an authentic and honest response. Now, I know we're at time, and I really appreciate everyone's participation. What I want to do in closing is just give all of our panelists just a quick 30 seconds to share some closing thoughts that they want everyone to take with them, just to practically put some of these things into action, not only now, but again, we want to build a better future. Let's use this pandemic as an opportunity. We know there's been a lot of loss, and we're really sorry that, for the losses that people have experienced, but there is a future ahead of us, and we really want to be thoughtful and mindful about how we use this moment to build that better future that we want to see. So we'll start with Narayan. If you could just give us some closing thoughts really quickly. You're on mute, just in case you I'll unmute you. There you go.
As I suspected, I thought I would gather a lot more than I would contribute, and that was the case. You're probably hearing my daughter in the background, but I'm worried that we have not been as intentional as we should be. And hearing all of you, Kennedy, the moment-to-moment intentionality that you have with your interactions is humbling. I'm going to take that away. There are 25 of us. We've been around each other forever. It doesn't mean that maybe I don't know what's going on. So I'm certainly going to engage a bit more and be more intentional with my interactions with my colleagues.
There we go. Okay, I did the thing I've been trying to avoid. All right, at least I didn't stand up, and I'm not wearing pants or anything. So that's the worst Zoom type of thing that can happen. So what I was saying, Narayan, is I loved having you on this call because I think in some way all of us are connected with healthcare. So we're in this day in and day out. But I think for a lot of people who are not in this work, it's not as front of mind until this crisis happened. And so we really, again, want to be able to integrate this in really meaningful ways in not just the healthcare spaces, but in every workplace that people have, because this is so foundational to their ability to feel whole. Go ahead, Kennedy. We're going to get you to go next.
Yeah, and I'll make this really quick. I actually appreciate that Dr. Fong led us to the mental health path, because the other thing that I'm really doing, I believe, again, about the whole person and building that relationship, understanding the whole person. But I also am a self-proclaimed total health evangelist, right? And so health is not just about the physical aspect. It is also very much about the spiritual aspect and the mental aspect. And so I am so glad that you ended on that note. We have to be more aware of the mental health aspect for what our staff is going through as it relates to the climate that we're in today. So if you take anything away, I would say focus on building the relationships, being intentional, and paying attention to the whole person, which includes the mental health.
Thank you so much for that, Kennedy. And our executives, thank you so much. Dr. Shanique, any final thoughts before we go?
Yes, just a couple of thoughts. I would just encourage everyone to remember that you're working with human beings who are going to have emotional responses at this time. And what they need most is your compassion and your leadership. And leadership means that you're a model for what you desire to see. So keep that in mind as you're interacting and as you're placing expectations and demands, you have to model that. So just lead with compassion, and that's all I got.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Dr. Shanique. And last but not least, Dr. Fong, would you like to share your closing thoughts? We won't tell your husband what you said about him.
Honestly, I mean, I think the fact that you guys attended this webinar is a huge testament to the fact that you care about your employees. And so we just really want to thank you guys for your time. And we're really excited to be able to share our thoughts with you.
Thanks so much. And I want to give a personal thanks to all of our panelists and everyone who was able to join us today. If you guys want to get in contact with us in the future, we're going to put some information on the screen, and we'll be sending this webinar out via email if you registered. And I just want to say thank you, because we said that this webinar was 45 minutes just so we could get you. So we got you. And now you're here for the full hour. We didn't mean for it to go for a full hour, but we had such rich content, and we have so much more that we want to give you guys. Please feel free to be in contact with us moving forward, and we'll also be sending out Rio Holidays graphic recording after this as well, which is going to just be phenomenal. We look forward to seeing you guys later. Please check out Free Minds Festival, which actually this is based on. This is a festival that was supposed to be a week ago, but is going to happen in September around workplace wellness for your employees. We will share more information about that. And with that being said, we'll see you guys next time. Stay in touch, stay safe, stay healthy. We really care about you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.